As we evolve, building stronger men is an important feature for humanity. Men have always been sort of living in the shadows, hiding their emotions. But as we've evolved more and more, especially through the COVID year, men are now starting to stand tall and we're starting to see stronger men evolving into leaders. Hi, on today's show, we're going to be talking to Martin Gillespie, who's an advocate for building stronger men. He's a survivor of cancer, but more importantly, he's a great storyteller. So let's welcome to the show, Martin. How are you, Martin?
I'm well, thanks, Joe. Thanks very much for having me on your show. I'm really delighted to be here.
Thank you. Look, I'm a bit of a stalker. I stalk people on LinkedIn, and as soon as if they capture my attention within the first 10 seconds, I send them a message. And I really, to be honest, I really got interested in yours because well, you do a lot of great things, but I love the fact that you're a storyteller. I'm really into the whole storytelling sort of genre at the moment, just hearing things through story. And I think I'm trying to emulate that through the podcast. So before we start, let's hear a little bit about your background. Maybe tell us a bit where you're from and some the things that you do.
Sure, and thankfully, we can do some translation here because, as you can gather with my accent, I was born in the beautiful country that gave us Lewis Capaldi, haggis foods, and bagpipes. So, not a bad combination to be brought up. But I've been in Australia for over 20 years. And part of my story is there are so many different parts to it. But in essence, you know, I was on that treadmill of life where you're programmed as a man, if that makes sense, that you go out, you get a job, you get a good income, you buy a house, white picket fence type of situation. Um, and I was married, I had two kids, and in 2010, that's when the wheels started falling off a little bit emotionally as well. And so my mum passed away at the age of 68 in Scotland. She'd had heart disease, stroke, and that was the first time I'd actually dealt with an emotional loss. And I know we spoke about it off
Mm,
camera. So when you're dealing with that, you think you know the answers and you think you can contain it internally. And in hindsight, I wish I'd put my hand up and got some counseling and some help.
mm,
Again, we're not built to think that way as men.
mm. Do you think it's also because you were, sometimes we may think that we're old enough, we don't need to. We're men, we're not boys, we're men. So we could deal with our parent passing, but the reality is that you're still human.
Without shadow of a doubt. And I guess it goes back to childhood as well, that you know we learn not to show emotion from such a young tender age. Don't cry, or if you're playing sport, the biggest thing that people make the mistake saying to boys, or don't play like a girl. So you're putting those prejudice into a man's head.
Mm,
And when you're in your, I was what, late 30s when all this happened. And you're right. You think that you're a man, you're masculine, and you know you can stand tall, but your heart is broken. But you don't know how to deal with those emotions.
yeah. So you said that you wish you had. W- When did you realize? Like, was it?
So
Was it? That's later.
there's some other stories. So
Yeah,
that
we'll
was
talk.
when,
We're gonna talk a little bit about your history, so maybe you can bring that up a bit later.
sure.
Um, um, so because the storytelling part, I'm really interested. Like, what do you feel like the story needs to be now? What do we need to start telling men as us new story? Like, if we were to go once upon a time,
Sure.
like I think you're right. Like, if you look historically at storybooks, right, there is all these messages that are hidden in there telling boys what to be like. So if you had your way, what would the new story be?
Look, I think one of the key things that men have to learn is be truthful with themselves. And one of the key lessons that I have practiced over many years now, and I would give my 18-year-old self or young boy this advice: start meditating early. Once you know your inner self, you'll be able to grow, and asking for help is one of the key aspects to being a man and being connected with others. If
Mm,
you trust yourself, you will trust others. As we evolve, unfortunately, in the society that we have, we gain this distrust of others actually as men. And
yeah.
we allow ego to get ahead of our own self.
So let's just stop there for a little bit. So 2020, 2021, we're in it, aren't we? The whole mistrust thing seems to be getting stronger because of what's been going on in the world. Do you think that this, by changing the story, it's going to take time, or do you think that we're starting to do it already?
Well, I would say that we've started doing it already. To give you an example, last year I ran in my local community a men's circle twice a week. So I did originally. My original thought, Joe, was to do it as a pilot scheme to see if it works. And you
Okay.
know what? If it didn't work, it wasn't a failure. At least I put it out there. Over a 12-week period, I had 35 men come through and just connect.
Yeah.
And I
th-
think that the essence is men connecting,
Yeah. I,
just
I I agree. It's like we have
sharing.
we used to. I mean, I'm sure this we do the same thing in Australia, but we do it here. We used to do it through alcohol.
Mm,
You let's go to the pub and have a drink, and the connection would be maybe one or two words. Are you okay? Good. Okay, have another drink. So having those circles, because I do the same thing in Melbourne. We have circles here as well, and I'm the same as you. I never knew what would happen at a circle, but then when I went to one or ran one, it was like overwhelming how amazing it was. I thought, why didn't I do this earlier? So, are you? Is your circle still continuing, or is it just 12
well,
weeks?
I actually did it for 12 weeks, and I did it during the day because of the aspect last year, COVID, and men were at home. I thought, right, tap into a lunchtime, so the men would actually leave their house and come to it. So now I'm actually looking. I've almost got it confirmed to do one at night time, one every 2 weeks, because energetically different feeling at night than during the day.
Totally.
Plus, some of the lessons that I've learned is if I can tap into the youth to say to their fathers, you need to go to this because you'll be a better person. So you're playing on that emotion. And I don't mean it in a nasty way, I mean it in a productive way
Mm,
because there might be an abundance of books out there, but there's very little emotional contact for men to feel connected.
yeah.
Have that
Yeah.
space without, you make a really prevalent point, without the use of alcohol.
Yeah. Well, I think you make a really important point that this sort of went being in my head was that we really need to be targeting the youth so they could actually be the advocates of change, because sometimes our parents, or the parents of the youth don't have the skills to do the work. You know what
Look,
I mean? Like, yeah,
I,
like,
I, I totally agree, but one of the downsides about the youth is that they're wanting instant results.
mm,
And for connection, it's like any other relationship. It's not a transaction, it's a long term. And you're
mm,
going to have ebbs and flows. You're going, for a man, one of the things that I worked out very early on was if you've got an alpha male, you've got to allow him the
mm,
center of attention right away. The quiet one, you've got to pull through. In my men's circle, we had this beautiful 72-year-old man that came.
wow.
We said to him, that was a bit of an abnormality. And we said, "Why have you come?" He said, "I've got three grown up children, boys and girls. I've got two granddaughters, but I'm missing that connection with men, just to
Yeah.
talk to men, that man voice and
Mm,
man thought process." And it was beautiful. And men need that connection on every level. And, you know, I agree with you. The quintessential Aussie point is you stand around a barbecue in summer. How are you? I'm okay. What a negative question.
yeah.
Once you start mixing up the questions, like one of the things that I generally do is, what's made your heart dance today? So you're talking from the heart, not from the head.
Yeah.
So you're thinking emotionally, not thoughtfully, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Because I agree totally. It's just that I feel that, and I'm not being negative. I'm just more thinking about what we need to do in the background. Like, I do feel that there is still a tiny bit of mistrust. It's like in my men's support group on Facebook, I can see that everyone wants to be part of this journey, like you're talking about, but there's this little voice in their head that's saying, "Oh, be careful because if you're too vulnerable, they're going to use that against me, or they're going to look at me as weak." So we're sort of in that transitional stage of letting go of old ways and building new ways. Are you finding that sort of as well? Like you finding that we're sort of like in that transitional period of I need to forget who I was and become who I am.
I couldn't agree more. I think that the beautiful word that you said there is vulnerability, and unfortunately, we men shy away from that, and it's something we're not comfortable. But once you start on that journey, it opens so many avenues and so many avenues of happiness,
Yeah.
of um,
But you know what I was going to say, Martin, is that both you and I have had a crisis, right?
yes.
And I think this is the thing that I find really interesting with people that have gone through something like we have, a medical situation. Do you think it's possible for a man to go through what we're talking about without what we went through? You know, they can go through it without the crisis. Because I sort of want them to not have the crisis because my crisis was hideous. So, do you think that this is what is going to be possible? Because, you know, if every man has to go through a crisis, you could be waiting forever.
Well, it's funny you say that because um, where I see a big lack, and I would have to say the initiative that some of the health boards have brought on board, when you become a parent for the first time, as men, we don't know what to do.
Yeah,
And New South Wales Health are doing a pilot scheme, and hopefully it will elaborate into something more beneficial, where it's giving emotional support for men for the first 2 years of becoming a parent,
yes.
because there's hundreds of things for women, and there's women's groups, and there's, you know, I don't want to be sexist here, but most of the women will take that time out of the workforce to look after the newborn. Men
Yeah.
don't.
Well, don't you think? I mean, I hear you, but I think that we can have anything that we want, but we need to fight. We need to ask. You know, I think that men have been waiting. You know what I mean? Like a lot of men have been waiting for things to change. I think people like yourself who are so passionate about the way you talk about it, that's we need that. We need more of that. So men then become the people to advocate the change. You know what I mean? Like we can't turn around and say, "Oh, where's our support group?" if no one's saying anything.
Oh,
You know?
I couldn't agree more. And you know, one of the key points is just communicate, just talk. Yeah,
Mm,
it starts with a conversation. You
mm,
know, it's funny because yesterday I caught up with a mother who's got a 17-year-old and a 19-year-old boy. And I forgot about this last year. And we've mentioned about, you know, the pandemic, and we'll mention it once and that's enough.
yeah.
But for all those young boys and girls who have left school and started at university last year, that was a real struggle for them, because if you recall, when you start university for the first year, that quintessentially is your first year of freedom.
Mm,
Out of school, you make new friends, you experiment a little bit, you find out your place in society. But because they couldn't do that face to face,
mm,
a lot of those 19-year-olds have gone introvert as opposed to extrovert,
yeah.
and
I
they're
get,
really
I get.
struggling a little bit.
Well, I was just going to ask you because I don't know if this is going to sound me being a little bit unkind, but don't you think, right, that every experience that we have is our own, right? So my experience is separate to yours. So I was thinking, like, if those students were going from high school to university, wouldn't that'll be their experience? So wouldn't it be? It's, you know, would it matter that it's different to say what my experience was when I went to university? I think a big problem with what a lot of teenagers felt last year was there was a lot of expectation of what should be happening. So when you talk about learning and teaching courses, this is what I would love to see: is how do we teach people, men especially, how to adapt, right? How to go from I'm a husband to I'm divorced, or I'm single, I'm married, I'm now a father. Those the big issues seem to be adapting, right? There seems to be this story in your head where it should be easy or it should be this, but I found last year to be really good because I didn't compare it to any other year.
Look, I think that's a really good point. And one of the key things that came out of the circle and working with men is, why don't we learn these things at a young age
Yeah,
through
why don't
the
we?
system? Because when you look at when you and I went to school, regardless of the fact that you went to school here in Australia, I went to school in the UK, the same syllabus is
Mm,
almost identical. And we don't tap into the emotional well being of a man and an emotional well being of a woman. However, women seem to get more focus in many ways. And also, if you take it a little bit further, where I think that men have lost their voice the Me Too movement has done some wonderful, wonderful things, but
Mm.
it's also, to the downside, it's actually brought a little bit of lost aspects of men actually wanting to use their voice in a productive way.
Yeah. So
There's,
like,
there's
yeah.
a,
So it's
yeah,
sort of it's opened it all up, hasn't it? So you and I will look at back at this time and go, it was good that it happened, because I think men needed to be. I look at sometimes the Me Too movement being like making scrambled eggs, right? Me Too had to break the shell. Men don't like being broken shells because they're sometimes alpha. And now we're navigating, how do we become this new man? And so like, you're a dad, right? Do you have sons?
I've got two daughters.
Oh, okay. Because I wanted to know how you teach your sons how to do what
So
you're talking.
it's funny because one of the conversations that came out in the circle, and I had six men in front of me, and every week I would bring a different topic, and I brought the topic of intimacy, and every man went externally. Now, when I said about meditating, until you actually know internally how safe you feel, intimacy, you will always look externally for validation.
Right, okay.
However, it went from that to all the men in front of me had sons, and I've got two daughters. We went from that conversation to, what would you do if your son or my daughters were accused of or the victim of rape?
Yes.
Brilliant conversation. And honestly, I could feel myself as a facilitator going, what are you doing? You're not experiencing this. And just letting the universe play out, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it was fantastic. And these are the conversations I feel men our age should be having, because we will come into that circle um, that will appear to us, and it's not about judging, but it's about having those communications and
Yeah.
having
That conversation has to, if you look at the news just now, like, this interview's being done at the end of February. If we just look at the news in Australia right now, there is a really well-known private boys' school being exposed for rape culture. There
yep.
is a federal government for being exposed for rape and sexual abuse culture. So these are the most important questions, and I love it when people push it. Like, I love it when you do, when your circle becomes that, because I think for too long men have been a little bit. If they say no, I don't want to talk about that. We've let them, haven't we? We've
Oh,
sort of.
100%. I'm actually, and it's funny, although predominantly most of the people I work with are men, I actually do work with some women, because you need that equilibrium, you need that balance.
Mm,
And I've been working with this woman in the UK, and she's got two sons. And about 4 or 5 years ago, when our eldest is 19, 20 now, 4 or 5 years ago, he was with a group of boys and girls, and as you do, right? And you're just, you're 14, 15, you're just hanging around. And unfortunately, he went to tap this girl on the shoulder. She moved, and his hand ended up on her breast.
okay.
Someone took a picture of it,
Mm,
and he was accused of rape.
okay.
So for
Yeah.
3 months, that young man of 14, 15 had to check in every Friday night to the police station. He's now struggling to form intimate relationships with females
Yes.
because of the trauma.
So do you think that it's just gone a bit too far?
Look, I think, again, going back to your point there, Joe, around the Me Too stuff, the Me Too stuff has been fantastic at highlighting the sick, perverse nature of men's ego getting too far.
Yeah. Entitlement.
Yeah, that entitlement, that self, and that feeling of, I'm indestructible because of the job title I have. Or, and you make a great point then about schools. I'm the teacher, you're the pupil. You obey me because I'm superior. No,
Yeah.
that's, and all of this will come out in the wash, and there's a real undercurrent happening in every major city just now.
Yeah.
However, we've got to really, how do we address that? And we address that. Social media is something that can be scary, but can also be a great vehicle to have these conversations. But another point you made was, men are very good at hiding behind the mask.
Yes.
When you take that mask away and you reveal the true self, they're beautiful people, but they feel really vulnerable. And a key element that came out of my circle and working with men is that sense of insecurity and loneliness. And even if they're in committed relationships, they still feel a little bit insecure. And I think last year more so because they had that connectivity of going to work. Now you're at home, so you have to re-engage 24/7 with your partner.
Yeah, but
And
also you
one of the
said, if anyone that wears a mask, if you're wearing a mask, you'd have to be insecure because that's what the mask says. So it's so exhausting to have to wear a mask. I mean, like I think when you look at, I love like observing, people like when they're, just I like seeing how people behave, and with when you watch group of boys or teenagers together, you can see that whole social pressure and that whole peer pressure. How do we break that? Like, if say they're dealing with their sexual, what do you call it? Like they're growing into men and
Yep.
their virginity and all that, and everyone's pushing them to go to a party, and there's all this culture about doing it when you have a drink, and there's all that fueled stuff. How do you navigate a 16-year-old boy, teenager, to not do the wrong thing?
Look, it scares me a little bit because the accessibility, when you and I were 16, 17, alcohol was probably the thing that we went to, right? Because we thought that that was the thing. However, drugs are the prevalent thing that men and girls will get into at a younger age.
Mm,
The only thing you can do is one, make sure that those young men and women have unconditional love from you,
the
right?
parent or
Yeah, parents and also
teachers.
mentors or those with influence or on them. The one challenge as a parent I have is that I'm too close to my kids, right? And that's just a natural bond. But I can be impressionable on my neighbor's kids,
Yes. Okay.
right? Or and also the way that you magnetize. You and I have mentioned that one of the things that I took up on board this year is no alcohol. So when my neighbor's kids see me and I'm enjoying myself without alcohol, and they see me doing all the sports, etc., they're going, I want to be part of that.
Yes. Okay.
They can't drink at the age of 15, 16, well, legally, but they can go swimming, they can go running, they can do things. And as men, our instinctive aspect is to do things.
Yeah. I
And
mean, you said something before that I think is the key foundation of changing the world is that everyone has this vision of what their rite of passage is, and you're right. It used to be, well, it is still alcohol, losing your virginity, sex, all that stuff. But if wouldn't it be great if we taught everyone to learn to meditate, to
oh,
find who you are, and then at 16, rather than going looking for who you're gonna have sex with, you look. It's like you're coming out of yourself, party. That's the thing, isn't it? It's like pop culture, movies, everything just pushes us to do the other thing, the other side. So it's these sort of small steps. Are you finding you're getting many are young guys coming to the men's circles?
well, the age group that I have is really sort of the mid 30s, early 30s to about mid 50s,
Yeah.
which is predominantly the group that I want to address because globally that's the highest suicide rate in the world. And again,
Right.
you know, I bring that up quite regularly when I'm talking to men. Being quite open. Have you ever had suicidal thoughts? And once men and women sort of realize what you've asked them, it opens a hornet's nest going, well, maybe.
Yeah.
And once you can tap into that, you can actually put them on a pathway, which is really sometimes you need to have that sledgehammer or that tough love, as you and I might know it as. I brought it up with my eldest daughter is 13, and I brought up suicide because where I live in the last 6, 8 months has been 5 teenage suicides,
Mhm.
and 3 of them have been girls, all from the one school. And my daughter, I asked her straight up, "Do you know what suicide is?" And she's only 13, well, 14 actually, um, and she knew exactly what it was. So having the tools to be able to talk to your kids with the appropriate language is really important. And I think a call I would say for your for people listening to this, There's a mental health first aid certification that you can do in Australia. I would recommend everybody over the age of 30 to do it. At least I'm not using that as a, oh,
No,
you're
no,
really.
I totally agree. See, I agree with all these things that you're saying. What I have trouble with is how do we convince people?
Ah,
That's the thing.
so
There are people that are listening to this going, Martin, I'm on board. But how do we influence the people listening that are just not interested in doing that? You know what I mean? Like they're the ones that I find that we need to be targeting.
I think you've got to put it into the currency of what they gravitate to. What is it? I remember going. I was down skiing in wintertime, and they referred to getting favors done as a beer economy. So you get beers, you work out, you tap into people what motivates them, and say it's sport, for example, going right. Okay, so you're going to do an event, so you take those parameters and you go right. How do we talk and communicate? And men want to share their stories with other men.
Yeah.
And it's not about ego, it's about giving them that space to feel safe to talk about it.
Yeah, permission, isn't it? You're sort of saying that we need to give men
Yeah,
permission to do it because otherwise, without that permission, they're going to not do it because of judgment.
correct. And one of the things that I've been doing over the last few months is I actually write for the local newspaper, but I write with a female friend of mine to give that masculine and feminine energy when you're writing because again, I've got the masculine energy. I also have the feminine energy. But when you collaborate with others, you actually become stronger. And going back to your point, I think in order to get more men, is the understanding that we're stronger together.
Mm,
If we reflect on the strength of the Me Too movement, it wasn't just one individual, it was the strength of unity.
yes.
Now, if men can learn some of that, we can become just as strong and
Yeah.
become balanced. I don't want the men to go back to those dark ages of women are not allowed in these clubs, etc., like the 1950s. It's a seesaw. It's
Yeah.
a balanced approach is required.
Mm. Martin, I've interviewed a lot of people, and I think that you're like you've got such strong leadership. You know what I mean? Like listening to you talking, I could see men following you. So I'm really, firstly, I'm really, really wrapped that I got to
Oh,
reach
thank
out
you.
and meet you. But like, before we go, do you mind if we just touch upon your processing of having cancer and coming through that? Because I think that probably played into the way that you talk now, wouldn't it?
Yeah, without a doubt. So at the age of 41, I was diagnosed. If I take a little step back, my marriage had collapsed in the September, a 7-year marriage, and then in the November, I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer.
Where was it?
So I had a blood cancer, and I had a thing called non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and a
Mm.
variation. There are over 70 different types of non-Hodgkin's
Oh.
lymphoma,
You do realize that's how my mum died.
NHL.
With the same cancer. Yeah, so, like,
Wow,
this is
this
I
is
just think this is
serendipity.
no, we were meant to meet. So, yeah,
Well,
sorry.
without a shadow of a doubt. So stage 1 would just been a lump in my neck. Stage 2 would have been above my diaphragm. Stage 3 all over my body. Stage 4 all over your body and in vital organs. I had stage 4. I had lumps and bumps all over my body, and in my bone marrow, my white blood cells had cancer.
Yeah.
I had lost my sister in the April of 2012 to breast cancer. She was 37. So the stress, the emotional stress, I didn't know what my body was going through. When I was told I'd stage 4 cancer, the first thing I did, Joe, was I burst into tears.
Mm.
And my hematologist, who's now become a friend, if that makes sense, said to me, Martin, you're going in to see counselling tomorrow. And the first thing the counsellor said to me was, welcome to a new beginning. And you're kind of in this washing machine going, whatever you're smoking, I want something of it. But that's what helped me get through it all, getting the right counselling, making lots of mistakes in the process. And to be honest, one of the things, and we touched upon it earlier, I probably drank too much alcohol through that time as well because I went back to being that primitive man that I thought being a man, I'll drink alcohol and that will serve me. And that didn't serve me. Sugar and alcohol and cancer just don't work together. It's a
Yeah.
perfect storm. However, what motivated me was I had this appetite to learn and learn things that I can do in my control. I can sleep. I can get rid of toxic relationships in my life. And telling people in an Anglo Saxon way to get out of your life is so uplifting. They served a chapter in your life. Thank you. I want to open this door over here. But also saying no. As men, we're not programmed to say no to things. Unfortunately, we say yes to too many things
Mm.
and we become eggshells and we try to please everybody. The most important person to please is yourself. And you start developing certain things and you know, I say to my kids, I will make at least 3 mistakes on a daily basis, but I will learn 5 things. Try and tell that to a teenager and they'll look at you and go, you're stupid, you can't count. But if you're learning more things and growing on a daily basis, you will overcome adversity.
Yeah. Oh God, like I am supposed to be on Great Flame, right? And I decided to interview out of all my interviews you, and it's just been the universe loves me. I know. Thank you, Martin Gillespie. You are an inspiration. I'm going to definitely be stalking you more.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for your time.
No, thank you. And hopefully, if you have the time, we can have you back on because I think you have a voice that is so missing in our culture. I have to literally hang up because I'm going to cry. You made me so emotional. So thank you so much for being on the show. And you will definitely be following you in the future.
Thanks, Joe. Really appreciate it. And I hope you're well. It's fantastic to catch up with you. I was going to say in person. I look forward to catching up with you in
I
person.
know, one day. Thank you. You've been listening to the Secret Men's Business podcast. Now, don't forget the podcast is out on Monday. Oh, I'm getting emotional. And Thursdays. So make sure that you subscribe so you get notified. Okay, guys, we'll see you all soon. Bye.